Hi, I'm Zubair, and today I'm with Michael Klishin. Is it? How do I say it, Michael?
Klishin,
Klishin of
right.
Clojrewerkz. So, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, pleasure. So, could you tell me a little bit about your work with Clojure before we get into the details?
Sure. So I'm currently at the company called Pivotal, and we actually have little closure across. We have many projects and products, but I have a number of side projects. Some of them are commercial, some other aren't, and I have been using Clojure sometimes full time, sometimes part time, on and off since early 2011, I believe. Mostly doing stuff that can be, I guess, classified as data processing. I hate the term big data because it's not about how big the data is. But yeah, you have some data, you need to do something with it. You need to produce new data, you need to derive some insights from it, that kind of stuff. And because I'm a fairly long time open source contributor, pretty much everything I have ever done, which is a library, has been open source pretty much since day one.
I think you actually like inspired me a bit with. I think when I saw the amount of work that you've open sourced. I mean, I actually some time ago I was using Neo4j, and I wanted to interface from Clojure, and of course it was your library Neocons, which was it something you wrote all yourself or?
Well, Clojrewerkz started at a tiny company in Munich, where just two people, both of which are still involved with Clojrewerkz, myself and Alex, we needed a few libraries. We needed a MongoDB client. The one that had been around at the time wasn't exactly great in our opinion, so we decided to give it a try. Developer new ones were pretty happy with the results after just a few days. And then we needed one more, like another library, which I think Neocons was the second one. Oh,
What
sorry, it
was
was
the
the
first
third one.
one actually? I think I
The
remember.
first one was Langor. Or is it Langor? I don't speak German. It is a RabbitMQ client. The second one was Monger,
Okay,
or MongoDB client. The third was Neocons, and then I think Elastic.
okay.
And from there, we had external contributors and people who use our stuff, and started sometimes developing things as experiments. Some of them worked out, some didn't. Yeah.
So do you see Neo4j being used a lot in companies?
Yeah, I do see people use Neo4j, and from time to time with Clojure. I personally didn't have to use graph databases in the last year or maybe a couple of years, but I do hear from people using Neo4j, like people contributing to Neocons, people contributing and asking for Neo4j support in other projects I'm involved with. I also know folks at Neo4j; they are very nice people.
Okay. Um, Now, I wanted to ask you a bit about Clojrewerkz again. I mean, there seems to be a lot of stuff on there. Could you, I mean, how many of these libraries are yours that you've made, and how many are from other people?
I actually never tried counting. I think 80 something percent were started by either myself or Alex, and primarily maintained by us.
So
The
who's Alex? Sorry.
the person who I have been working with in 2011, he's now at a company called CodeCentric. He doesn't like to publicize his last name on the internet. That's
Sure,
why I'm
sure.
not saying it. Um, so yeah, the guy who founded Clojrewerkz with me.
Okay, it's quite impressive, I have to say. So, can I go back in time a bit and find out what's your history? How did you get into computers, and what eventually has? I mean, I assume that Clojure is your favourite language, or is it,
I don't have a favorite
or
language.
it's one of the most used languages that you work with?
It's certainly a language I enjoy using and see a lot of reasons to use.
What other stuff do
Yeah.
you use? What sort of tools do you use?
So I work on the RabbitMQ team. So the three languages I use the most are Erlang, Java, and C Sharp.
Okay.
I have a Java and Ruby background. I have done some front-end web development over 10 years ago. And because I contribute to basically every RabbitMQ ecosystem project that needs help, bearing maybe like Perl and PHP, which I have never actually touched. I have used, I think, 10 or 11 languages in the last year alone, including Go, Haskell, Python, Groovy, whatever. So all kinds of things. And maybe that's why I don't have.
Sorry, I didn't hear the last part. Sorry.
Maybe because I use multiple languages on pretty much every week, I don't have a favorite anymore.
Okay. So where are you based actually?
I am based in the Moscow area these days. I am originally from Western Russia, from a pretty small town.
Okay. And how did you get into computers and programming and stuff?
Well, I got lucky because my dad was, he's a chemical engineer. His first degree is chemical engineering. And so at some point in late 80s, I think Hewlett-Packard wanted to open a plant in the area where my parents were based back then. And so what happened, they hired my parents to basically run like a pilot on that plant. And so that's how my dad had like exposure to computers and got himself like a 286 laptop, as far as if my memory serves.
Okay.
And
so is this in the 80s then? In the late 80s? Or
I maybe early 90s. I don't really remember. But I was a fairly little kid, maybe 9, maybe 10 or something like that. And yeah, which means it probably was like early 90s. And so I was very curious and grabbed it one day, started figuring out what the hell this thing is. My dad showed me a couple of games. And from there, two things started. First, for some reason, I realized that I like all these technical things, not necessarily hardware, but yeah, everything that is related to technology. And another thing that happened, I now had a real reason to learn English.
Okay.
Because I needed to understand what the hell is going on in those games, especially. I like quests for whatever reason, and you cannot play a quest without, a decent command.
So do you think that trying to learn how technology things work makes people want to learn English, or was yours a special case? Do you see that often?
Yeah, because, well, whether for better or worse, English is the international language of the technical community. At some point, if you want to interact with like the global technical community, you have to begin. You have to get yourself a decent command of English. One example of that is GitHub. There are certainly projects that are like in Russian, Chinese, and Arabic, whatever. But everything that is popular is either in English or at least is primarily in English. For example, Ruby still has like Japanese documentation, but most of the docs are in English these days. So I think that pretty much people who really want to get into technology have no choice. They are exposed to it. It's a requirement if you want to do this for a living. I don't know. At that age, for me, it was almost just a curiosity thing. I just wanted to figure out what the hell is going on. I didn't realize that this language is used by people all over the globe, and in particular in the tech industry.
So which languages were you using on the 286 mostly?
I didn't program on the 286. I was playing games and figuring out how to. I was messing with DOS and figuring out why the hell it wouldn't boot and what
Okay.
was like high memory is and what to do, what autoexec.path is.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that was a bit later, and why you shouldn't mess with that.
Yeah. All this stuff I still, scares me today as well.
Right. It's like, imagine if on Linux or Mac OS X you had your bootloader
Yeah. Oh,
exposed
yeah.
without any sort of super user privileges necessary to mess with it.
Yeah.
It
Correct.
was nuts. But basically, I started programming at maybe 12 or 13, I don't know. And I hate to admit it, but my first language was Visual Basic 2 or 3 or something like that.
Visual Basic was actually an excellent way. I think I'm in my 40s now, so most people of my age got started with like Commodore 64 and Spectrum and doing Basic. So in some ways, I think a lot of people look down on it, but it should actually get more praise than it does, I think.
Perhaps. Yeah, it's a bit unfortunate that we didn't have like the Commodore 64 here. It was. I was born in the Soviet Union, so you didn't have a lot of that stuff there. But also in Russia in the 90s, there wasn't a whole lot. And I also remember having some Soviet computers that used tape as a durable data store, and that was a lot of fun as well. As far as I remember, I actually programmed those a little bit as well, but they were like programmable calculators. They kind of were computers, but it was very, very different, and even the kind of graphics compared to the 886 we had, the difference was so huge that I quickly lost interest. But I do remember what it's like to boot from a cassette tape and all the sounds it makes.
The Commodore 64 as well was cassette tape, and I can remember sitting there for half an hour waiting for something to load.
Yeah. But for some reason, if I could grab one of those things these days, and probably I can if I search like hard enough, it would be a lot of fun to spend the weekend with that.
Okay, so then you're programming in BASIC, and then what did you like build stuff with it, and did you build serious stuff, or did you what was your progression then?
So learning Visual Basic helped me with a couple of things. First, I realized that I actually have no idea about what the hell is this Windows thing is.
Okay.
There is so much stuff, and I can read enough English by now to follow it, but I have no idea what those subroutines are and so on. So it was on one hand humbling. On the other hand, if I didn't get good grades in school, my parents, they didn't ground me, but they prevented me from using the computer. I had to bargain with them that I'm not going to play in games. I'm going to program and stuff. And of course, I didn't program 100% of the time, maybe not even a third of the time when they were not at home. But still, I did program for a while, and at a certain point, the internet started appearing. Again, I got lucky because my dad knew people at the first ISP in town.
Okay.
Which means we were one of the first families to have internet connection in 1996 or 7 or something like that.
And what was your first thought of the internet when you first logged on? Did you...
Well, it was... I don't remember much, but the thing is, Google wasn't around as far as I remember, at least for a few months. And so I was like, okay, this is a pretty cool thing, and there is a bunch of images and something I can search, and everything loads very slowly, and it is expensive as hell, but it's pretty cool. I actually... because I didn't realize it, for me back then, at least for the first year, the internet was like the ISP's homepage, which led to Lycos or Alta Vista or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
And I didn't really know that many resources. Like I had no idea about Yahoo or AIM or stuff like that.
Did they
up
used to
until
block stuff in Russia, or did
No,
they?
they only started like blocking sites maybe a couple of years ago, and well, some people say it's very political. Others say no, it's not. Of course, the system is being abused to some extent, but it's not entirely unreasonable in my opinion. But no, it only started a couple of years ago. For a very long time, the internet in Russia was completely uncensored.
Okay.
But yeah, back to the internet. So I think I was maybe, 14, 15. It was 1998, 1999 when I started getting into networks. Like I have built like a bunch of home networks with my friends. In Russia, most of the buildings are like multiple apartments. Well, not most of them, like virtually all of them. And so it's pretty easy if your friends live nearby, you can just, throw Ethernet cables around and have a local network and play games and stuff. So this is how I have been spending a lot of my time when I was 14 or 15, because I wasn't particularly popular with the opposite sex and stuff. So programming sort of shifted back a little bit. And then I think I have picked up programming again when I realized there was an internet service that didn't require like signing a contract. You would dial a particular number and you had the first minute free, and from there it got pretty ridiculously expensive. Okay. So what I did is I developed a program that would connect, wait for 50 seconds, then disconnect, then connect again, wait for 50 seconds, and so on. And so you could have an internet connection for free, which wasn't convenient.
Because it was free for the first 50 seconds? Or no, it was cheaper for the first 50 seconds? Or?
No. It was entirely free for the first 50 seconds. And they have had the system for like well over a year, maybe even a couple of years, before they probably decided to check their logs and see that at least someone is gaming the system.
But were a lot of people doing this, or was it just you, as far as you know?
Well, I know that a few of my friends were doing it, because basically we co-developed that thing. So I guess this was a moment for me when I realized that if you have programming skills, you can do stuff that nobody else can. And many people consider it to be impossible.
Correct. So what did you program this in? What language?
I think it was Delphi.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, yes. Is that Delphi? Is that like Pascal? Is it?
Yeah, I think it's based on Pascal. Yeah. I actually hated the thing, and I don't remember much about it. But I think Delphi is like Object Pascal or something like that.
Yeah.
And I guess by the time I was 16, I got a job as a network engineer, but not in the sense that what network engineers with Cisco certifications do today. I knew enough about computers and networks to take a bunch of Ethernet cables, wire them in the right places of like a building, connect them to a bunch of computers and set up like IP addresses, probably even without using the HCP. And boom, you had a working local area network.
So did you do this for companies or?
Yeah, I was hired to do this. It wasn't my own thing. Well, I probably couldn't open the company at the age of 16 anyway. And also, the private sector in Russia at that time was a pretty odd thing, because we haven't had private property for ages, right, with the Soviets. And now suddenly everybody was starting companies. It was very underdeveloped, so I probably wouldn't risk it anyway. But I was hired.
So was it like was it a bit slower than the States, where but because I remember I was living in Czech Republic in the in the late 90s. I was there for a bit, and definitely internet adoption was nothing compared to how it was in the States or in the UK. I remember that.
Well, I have never been to the US or UK at that age, so it probably was a lot slower for all kinds of reasons, but it was actually much faster than some people realize. I think the internet penetration in Russia is actually quite high, with the exception of like the elderly people. And for some reason, technologies such as like mobile internet and Wi-Fi and stuff like that, they usually spread like wildfire.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, I think nowadays it's everywhere, though. Yeah.
So I think it was slower because so fewer people were, able to program. So fewer people had computers and I mean sufficient English skills to like program and publish stuff. But it was growing pretty rapidly, and I think in early 2000s, maybe 2001 or something like that, I started exploring this DHTML thing, or whatever it was called. Basically JavaScript and HTML as DOM0 as we know it today. So I fairly quickly realized that there is enough demand for it and virtually nobody can do it. So I got into web development around that age, maybe it was 17 or 18. And in 2002, I have enrolled into a joint math computer science degree.
Okay, where was that?
In my hometown.
Okay. And did you do a lot of programming in your course, or?
Oh yeah, there was a hell of a lot of programming and also a hell of a lot of math. I had no idea how they managed to cramp that much into like a single degree, because it wasn't as bad as say math school where people study like for 11 hours a day or whatever. No, it wasn't that bad, but we did a lot of programming. I was dabbling in Java and C. I think in the freshman year, I had to use Pascal, which I hated with passion. I never really was a C fan. At least back then, I probably didn't understand the value of it. And that's how I gradually got into memory managed stuff, and Java in particular.
I think it's an interesting point because I've done assembly in C and C++, and I think when these developers who've never done C or C++, and they're never going to understand or develop in the same way as people I think people who haven't done it won't understand people who have done it. It's almost like a chasm, and because you have a different understanding of how you can talk to the machine if you've done C and C++. Yeah,
well, some people sort of go back to lower levels, and I was one of those people. So I, at some point, realized that yes, this Java thing is cool, and I can make a pretty good living out of it, being, not even out of college. I also have done a bunch of Flash, which is I'm ashamed of that even more than started with Visual Basic. But at some point I realized that, hey, I actually have no idea how computers work. And so I need, I also had to, program in C++ and a bit of Haskell in the university. So I had to know some stuff. But if you ask me what the hell is a system call, or how does data reach, like, when you call the right function, how exactly does that reach the disk? I had almost no idea about that. So at some point I figured I should spend some time figuring that out, and I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I guess I know enough to.
But do you think that made you? Do you think that made you either like build better products or a better developer, having known all of this low-level stuff as well?
Absolutely, because first of all, if you don't know a bunch of that, you can only debug so many problems, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's and okay, maybe we're moving into the world where platform as a service and automation are at the level where in production you relatively rarely would have to touch that kind of stuff, or maybe like site reliability engineers would, but engineers won't. But you have to debug stuff even locally, like to be able to reproduce various intricate issues. And also, if you don't know how computers work, it is so easy to get into believing the hype, which has no is not backed by, like, physics and facts. I guess fact is what I'm trying to say. Stuff like, not picking on any particular technology, but stuff like Node.js is great at parallelism. Of course it's not. It's single-threaded event loop at the core. What kind of parallelism are we talking about? Concurrency with respect to I/O, okay, but not parallelism. But so many people believe that because they don't realize how event loops work, and that is just basically a while loop with some clever operating system APIs.
I think that's a good point you make, actually, because I do see a lot of people who are coming into the industry in web development, and whatever the latest hype is that they've heard, they say, oh, this, like you say, like Node.js, oh, this is the best thing, and they don't actually know how things work. And people are just repeating whatever is the most popular thing. Like some people, I've heard people say, JavaScript is the best language. And I said, what do you mean by best? It's actually quite a crappy language, but it's the most popular, yeah. But,
Well, because it has no competition in the browser. As soon as it gets some real competition in the browser, then it's toast. Well, or at least it's gonna, have to change in pretty drastic ways.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, sorry. So you were talking about so you did the university stuff. You're at university, and then what happened?
At some point, I managed to graduate.
Okay.
But before that, in 2005, I have moved to the States for maybe 6 months.
Okay.
For, let's say, personal reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let's leave it at that. But those personal reasons didn't work out. But I was very proficient at reading and writing English in 2005. I was 21, by the way.
I'm actually very impressed with your English. I really am.
Well,
so I assumed you'd lived abroad as well at some point.
Well, no more than a year collectively, but I have been using it for over 10 years professionally, so it's not particularly surprising. But anyway, and that's how I managed to get some actual speaking skills, because if you live in the States, you have to talk to people. It's not easy the first few weeks, maybe month, but then it's you just switch to think in English.
Yeah.
And that was a major boost to my career as a software engineer.
Okay.
Because now, instead of getting contracts with probably the shittiest clients ever,
what do you define as
could
shitty?
Actually have no idea what they need, or they need some BS. You are not going to learn anything or improve your existing skills. They pay you pennies and so on and so forth. We probably all have had at least one.
But why did English make the difference? Was it a difference in skill or in confidence, or?
In confidence, in just that I could, people who previously wouldn't even consider working with something like me suddenly realized that, okay, we can talk to this guy, he probably has some chops, so maybe we should evaluate him and so on. And also I switched to reading every single technical thing that I have read since 2005 is in English, with some rare very rare exceptions.
Okay.
Because the thing is, well, I can only say confidently how things are in like Russian and Spanish, two languages which I can read reasonably well. Well, I'm a native Russian speaker, so I can read that. Most of the technical resources in other languages are actually 80% translations of English stuff. And translations that happened like half a year later or something like that. And maybe the gap is significantly lower now, but still, it's like you're always running behind. Several steps. The only difference is like, are you running behind a week behind or several years behind? And so once I realized that, I started, I guess the internet for me became the English part of it. And I have discovered a lot of technologies, languages, approaches, functional programming, which I thought was like an annoyance in my fourth year at university, where I had to like write my own list reverse function in Haskell recursively.
So did you use things like Lisp at university as well?
We had Haskell in the function.
Oh, Haskell. Haskell's pretty amazing. What's your view on Haskell, actually?
It's great. It's relatively difficult to adopt. I hope it succeeds, well, at least to some extent in the future. I don't use it much. I'm open to using it someday. Actually, my Haskell skills are pretty crappy.
Okay.
But I definitely see that they do a lot of things right. But also, it's difficult to adopt for various reasons.
Have you ever used Scala, by the way?
Yes, in fact, between. So I guess we can continue my story, and I will get to Scala pretty quickly.
Okay, sure. Okay, yeah, let's do that.
So in 2005, someone showed me Ruby, or rather, I read about this guy called David Heinemeier Hansen, who you're in Denmark, right?
So he's from over here. Yeah.
He's a fellow.
Yeah.
So
I think he lives in the States now, though. So
he does. But basically, I discovered Ruby and realized that for many things, it is just so much easier to use than Java.
I think we should clarify, though, it's actually from Japan, but he made the web framework, David Heinemeier.
Yes, Ruby is originally from Japan,
by Max,
and Ruby was developed in 1992, but up to 1999, there was no English documentation of any kind. And a guy called Dave Thomas wrote the first Ruby book in English in, I think, 1999, using their C source code.
It's quite funny you actually said, because it's made in 1992, because I've heard so many comments from people saying, oh, you don't want to use a new language like that, and I say, no, actually, Ruby's older than Java. So people don't know the history, Yeah, sorry, continue,
Right, so basically in 2006, there weren't that many Ruby jobs out there, but because I was working remotely anyway, there was a company in Kiev that had very forward-thinking people who decided to use Rails and build their company around it. And for some reason, they decided to hire me, even though I pretty much had no Ruby experience. And so I have done a few years of Ruby, then picked up we're using Ruby and Java at the same time for a bunch of years, and I think in 2009 or so, I wasn't entirely happy with both of them, and I wanted something that combined their strengths. So runtime characteristics of Java and static typing, and the elegance, the functional idioms, and just how straightforward many things are from Ruby. And so Scala was probably the best candidate at the time. It's still one of them.
But it's got very long compile times, hasn't it?
I didn't know it back then.
Okay.
So I have done a couple of years of Scala. The compile times didn't bother me that much, maybe because my code base wasn't gigantic. But what bothered me was backwards compatibility. Every time a new Scala compiler release came out, you had to recompile. Well, you had to wait for the entire ecosystem to be recompiled. And then you had to recompile your own stuff. It took forever. When you needed like a new release of this library where the author has decided to use the most recent compiler version, you were stuck. You couldn't upgrade because you were using an earlier Scala version. But you also couldn't move to the newer one because most of the ecosystem wasn't there yet. It was horrible.
Is this a big problem, though? Is this a big problem? Because I've never used Scala, really. So
that was a terrible problem. Things are better now. Because, like I said, if you need a newer library, you sometimes have to decide between using a newer library, which has like a bug fix you need, and a newer compiler version. And that's just a horrible mess. And the amount of time people collectively spend dealing with that, it's enormous. And so in 2011, I have figured I have been doing something for about 3 years, working for the same company, and probably I should have, switched to something different because I was so tired of doing like 60% web development, 40% something relatively interesting. And so I have joined a friend of mine at a small company in Munich. He had exactly the same situation. He had the Java and Ruby background, and he wasn't exactly happy with either of those two, and he wanted something that combined their strengths. But we both had enough exposure to Scala to realize that maybe we should look at something else.
Okay.
And we decided to look at Clojure, where, maybe it looked a little bit odd. By the way, I'm a long-time Emacs user, so S expressions don't intimidate me one bit.
Okay.
But it was a pretty fringe thing anyway, and we decided, let's give it a try for 2 weeks, and if it doesn't work, we'll go back to Scala, and we did, and we were so happy even after 2 weeks that we figured, no, we're sticking with this.
Okay, did you use macros a lot when you used Clojure? Because for me, I think macros and the immutable data structures, there's so many things that actually, what are the good and what are the bad points of it that you see? Or you continue with your story. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead here.
Well, the story basically circles back to where we started, to how Clojrewerkz started. The good things about Clojure are it's very stable. In fact, alpha releases of Clojure are more stable than final releases of some other languages. There aren't that many languages that have this level of stability.
That's correct. I've noticed that as well. Yeah.
Commitment to backwards compatibility for the most part. Again, this is what I really like about Java. Clojure is very small. It's flexible. I have developed some DSLs and I do use macros here and there, but I actually use them a lot less than my friends think who have never used Clojure. They think that I write macros all day long. No, I actually spend 1% of my time on macros.
Sure, yeah.
And most of the time you benefit from the identity value separation, immutable data structures, the fact that Clojure has a fantastic collections library. And many small conveniences like the threading macros,
core async,
and so on. I'm not a core async fan, and I actually have used it very, very little in Clojurescript. Actually, I do from time to time have to read the code that uses it now.
I was actually going to ask if you could talk a bit about Clojurescript and your views on that as well.
It's nice. I mean, as soon as we get Clojurescript and Clojrescript, I think there is gonna be a surge in popularity. But I don't do web development these days, so there is no real reason for me to use it. In one of my side projects, which is like an Internet of Things startup. Other folks who do web development decided to use Clojurescript. We are like 99% Clojure at the moment, or Clojure/Clojurescript.
Well, what's your company now then I mean, is Clojrewerkz a company or is it your organization only for your projects?
No, it's just an umbrella organization on GitHub. We have plans to have some sort of nonprofit behind it, but for various reasons, it's not particularly easy to open one anywhere, maybe except the UK. For us, I mean, I'm not speaking in general. Well, hopefully something will materialize this year, but it will not be a for-profit entity.
Okay.
Not because I'm a crazy communist, just because I don't want to. I don't want Clojrewerkz to become like the primary thing that I do.
Okay. Sure.
It's a little bit by going back to Ruby. I think David Hansen has expressed this opinion that for him Rails is an awesome, maybe like a lifelong side project, but he wouldn't do this like full time. And the same here. I can see this. It's just a way to collaborate with people, develop better tools, learn new stuff, maybe just, switch gears and shift your focus from what you do day to day. But I cannot imagine working on Clojrewerkz full time for whatever reason.
Okay. Yeah, I actually, I was not sure because, I've written about you on my blog, and I did a screencast on one of your on neocons. Actually, the only thing with neocons I didn't like was the name because it has some
political
smell to it. Yeah. So I thought, okay, anytime someone Googles neocons, what if they find my name? So even if it's on the second page, I was just trying to avoid it, but I don't think it matters. There's enough neocons other websites out there. So, but yeah, I wrote.
I'm sure not all neoconservatives are complete nut jobs and crazy people. Well, it was a pun, obviously. It was Neo4J.
Yeah.
And cons, the fundamental Lisp operation, which Lisps have had for over 50 years now. And Clojure still does. So, I think one of the first questions folks from Neo4j asked me was, okay, we like the project and it has some docs and we need to, have a Clojure client, but what's up with the name?
That's funny.
But actually, interestingly, these days nobody asks. I guess it's popular enough in the community.
Did you talk much to the Neo4j guys when you were building it? Because I actually know them because they're quite close to us here. They're in just about an hour away in Malmö in Sweden. Have you spoken to them at all?
Not at the point when we were developing it, but shortly after. As soon as I released them, one of their developer advocates reached out to me and invited me to the mailing list and various community resources and so on.
Who is that? Was that Peter? Or?
I think it was either Peter
Neubauer, yeah.
Right, Neubauer, or Michael. I don't remember.
Yeah. They're a great bunch of people, actually. And Peter's now doing a new startup now where
some mapping thing.
Yeah, Mapillary. Yeah. It's and they're trying to do like Google Street Maps, but at a much finer level of granularity. And I think they're going to do very well. Actually, I think they'll do very well.
Yeah, Peter is a very nice guy. I wish them well.
Okay. So I was doing my own little project, and that was why I wrote about you, because I always wanted a few parts of my own project, and that was data access, front end. For front end stuff, I chose Clojurescript and OM, and for the back end, I was using databases and Neo4j, and of course that's when I saw your project, and I think I don't know if you've seen the article, but I posted an article on my website about a year ago, and I think it was more for me to learn Neo4j and neocons, sometimes it's easier to write about something for me, because then that forces me to try and learn the details of it. And I was just so impressed because everything just worked really well, and it's still part of this framework which I've got. So I was very happy with the work that you've done.
Well, that's very good to hear.
Thank you. And did I hear you say you're working at Pivotal now? Is it?
That is correct.
Okay. And so is this the pivot? This is Pivotal in the large. Is it like a consultancy in the United States? Is it called Pivotal Labs or just Pivotal? Because I've heard about it, but here in Denmark, I don't think they have many customers. So I don't. I've just heard about it. Could you tell me a bit about? Are they a big company or what?
So Pivotal was formed when EMC and VMware decided to put a bunch of their assets, a bunch of their teams dedicated to like application and cloud platform development into a single company. So it was like a spin-off in a way, but also even almost a spin-in in some ways. So it was a company that was formed by extracting teams from two large companies. These days it has three divisions. The one I work at is the Cloud Platform Group. The cornerstone of it is Cloud Foundry and our commercial distribution of it.
What's Cloud Foundry? I've heard of it. Is that like a?
Cloud Foundry is a platform as a service, which is open source. You can think of it as, maybe it's not entirely fair comparison, but what OpenStack tries to do for infrastructure, Cloud Foundry tries to do for application development and operations too, because this is one of the best things about PaaS. But yeah, back to Pivotal. So Cloud Foundry is sort of the most, I guess, important project we have, but it also has teams that work on Spring, on RabbitMQ, on Redis. I'm sure on various like Spring-related projects like Reactor. I'm sure there's something else. I'm just not familiar with it. So it's a pretty large company. And two other branches are big data, so a data suite like Hadoop and parallel processing databases and sophisticated in-memory caches. And we have a services arm called, well, it was originally called Pivotal Labs. Now it's just a part of Pivotal, which offers agile development for clients, which is not just, development like a typical consultancy. We actually try to train their teams so that they adopt the process.
Okay.
And there is, I think there are services teams that do mobile development and data science.
Okay.
Yeah, but I don't really interact with them that much.
So do you have a lot of customers in Russia itself, or do you do development remotely? Or?
So I'm a product engineer, so the work I do is used globally.
Okay.
I know about a few companies, like very large companies in Russia that use some of our stuff, but I actually don't know how many there are, simply because I'm never called in, like sales meetings.
Sure.
And primarily because every single one of my immediate colleagues, except for like HR, they are in the UK, in the US, in various European countries, sometimes even like in Asia and Australia.
Okay. And is the Clojure or Clojurescript, you said that they're using Clojure in some places in Pivotal. Is there much usage there?
Well, no, there is one service that I originally had to write single-handedly, and I had very little time, so I just picked whatever I would expect to be, the most when working alone, Clojure was that language, and people looked at it. It's a pretty small code base. It may be 700 lines. It ships with our commercial Cloud Foundry distribution, or with its RabbitMQ add-on, to be specific. And the team that maintains that project now decided that, cool, we will just keep it in Clojure, at least for some time, like several months or so. So it's still in Clojure. People like it. People don't have to change it much. It runs. It pretty much never. Well, the fact that it is in Clojure never really resurfaces, because whenever there is a bug in that service, it's my own code. It's never Clojure or something that Clojure entails. So it just works, so nobody cares. That
exactly. When something works, people don't see the value as well sometimes. Okay, so you're saying that there's not that much Clojure usage within Pivotal itself. And have you ever used Lighttable?
No, never, because Emacs works well enough for me.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm a big fan of Lighttable, but I find that most people who use Emacs, it's like religion as well. Because people are so used to just using keyboards for everything, they're just not going to change. It's the people who haven't used Emacs that they use it more, I think. I keep switching between Emacs and not using Emacs, and at the moment I'm using Emacs just for editing. I'm using it just a bit like people use Vi, just to quickly edit a file sometimes at the moment.
Oh, sure. Is Lighttable still under active development? Because I haven't followed it for a long time.
Yeah, actually what happened was the founders of Lighttable, they've now pivoted and they've handed over Lighttable to some other developers who use a lot of Clojure and Clojurescript in their daily work in California, and the founders of Lighttable have now they've made another project called Eve, EVE, and they're trying to reinvent how development works. It's very hard to I don't know how to explain it yet, is the problem, but they're trying to use some sort of like you know what, the best thing is look at their website, but if you go to, there's something called incidentalcomplexity.com, and if you look at that you can see the work that they're trying to do now, and they're trying to make development so that it can be done by people who know Excel. Obviously not low-level development, but sometimes someone just wants something like a table or something, that they could do that themselves. They don't need to hire a developer always to do that. And I know there's a lot of tools on the internet which are trying to open up. Actually, I think this brings an interesting point. What do you think about this whole movement now where it's like everybody has to learn to code? What's your view on that?
I think that it's pretty beneficial. Maybe even very beneficial. It's pretty unlikely that everybody is going to learn to code, but I think a very substantial part of the population may be, may have sufficient programming skills to like put together like what we call scripts today, right, and like glue together various APIs and data sources. I think in some 20, 30 years, this will be the case. Like every other person is going to be confident enough with programming to do that without even thinking. It's obviously very, very beneficial, because I think programming, besides the obvious things like you can automate something or you can build yourself a tool, it helps you understand the value of data. And yeah, data is an incredibly powerful thing. Well, at least as long as it is correct and you understand like some basic statistics, that data can help you so much. So I think it's very, very beneficial for the entire society if people had better statistics and some basic programming tools. I'm not saying that everybody should be like a PhD in statistics. No, you can derive like 80% of the benefits with just 20% of the effort required to become like
correct. Yeah.
a very sophisticated statistician.
Yeah, it's interesting though because programming is hard. I think having to keep a whole system in your head or whatever, and I mean I do see it. I mean I think a big part of the education is people don't know the difference between writing a line of code and building a product, and often I see someone and they write a 2-line JavaScript program and they think they're a developer, and they don't realise that it's like a world of difference between doing that and shipping something, and that's just something I think people don't know, because I think if a lot of people, when they go into development of products, they go into it because it's fun, but there's also a lot of things which are not fun. And
sure, things from convincing people that your product is great, also known as being a good marketer, user support, all the accounting, financial stuff. That's not fun at all for most.
Yeah, people. Correct. Yeah, and just keeping a system up and maintenance. It's I mean, like I see a lot of like whenever I'm talking about products or building products, I see people saying, "Oh yeah, I can build that for you in a week." And I'm never worried about the 1 week's work. I'm always worried about the 6 months ahead, because how will it get maintained and stuff like that.
Yeah, this is why more people should at least consider using like a PaaS, a platform as a service, because it relieves a lot of the operation.
Yeah,
I'm not going to say all of it, but yeah, it's a huge step forward in terms of how you run things and how much effort you spend on development versus operations.
I agree. Maybe one thing I wanted to ask, you mentioned in the start, was you talked about Go, and I'm hearing so much about Go, and I know that Clojure and Clojurescript have tried to take some ideas from there in some way, but I've heard a lot about it. But what's the selling point of Go, would you say?
So I personally have written very little Go in my life, but Cloud Foundry has many services in Go, and some of them are very, very sophisticated. So like the application execution, runtime, and scheduler and stuff like that. They also interface with containers and so on. So they have non-trivial code bases in Go. And so I talk to people who use Go daily. I think the top selling points with Go is that Go is a small language. Actually, Clojure is a small language too, but Go looks very familiar for the most part.
Okay.
I think it has some pretty good tooling and like ideas in tooling, stuff like Go format. It's very practical. Type inference, even if your type system is very basic, having type inference is great. Fast compilation time, and pretty extensive and modern standard library. I think those are the key selling points. Well, its runtime is pretty efficient on most workloads as well. The fact that it is natively compiled, in some cases it matters, like the Cloud Foundry command line tool is now in Go, because when you step into a Wall Street financial services firm to like do a Cloud Foundry demo, if you ask them to install Ruby before you can do anything, that is a point of friction. So if you can just download something for Windows or Linux and run it, it's much better, right? So sometimes it matters. I'm not a Go fan. I think Go is okay. If I had to use it a lot more, like in a few years, say, I would be fine with it. But of course, I would much rather use Rust if I needed assistance language, or even Haskell, to be honest.
Okay. And have you used Julia at all?
No, I think I have looked at it a little bit, and
okay.
Yeah, I'm not really a mathematician, sure. So I should probably explore it.
And I wanted to ask you now. I think we're coming near the end, but what's your have you got any future projects or plans you'd like to discuss, or any projects you'd like to shout out to everyone?
Good question. I have been busy enough with Rabbit and Qubit internal pivotal things and my other small commercial product to not really
What's your commercial product?
spend much time on like Hacker News and stuff. I never go to Hacker News, but I mean, you get the idea. So I don't really have anything in particular to shout out, except that there is a couple of things that I think I have first realized them maybe 8 years ago. So and now people start going crazy on this. It's becoming a hot thing, which is people realize that it's very often, even in smaller products, it's a much better idea to not have a single giant code base in X, where X can be Java, Ruby, Go, whatever. But to have multiple, even if multiple means 2 or 3 services that do separate things, like one can be a web app in JavaScript, another can be a data processing bunch of services running on the JVM, and then you can have like a monitoring system in Go or whatever. This is a fantastic development. It does bring some new challenges, but I think most of them we can overcome, and it unlocks a lot of benefits. One of which, you don't have to write everything in a single language or even run on the same platform. If you want to use JavaScript here, go there, Clojure in this other place, and somewhere else you have to use .NET because you have to run Windows and stuff. You can do that. I think this is one thing I would shout out. And platform as a service is something that just goes very well with that. But other than that, was there anything like really interesting that I have seen in the last, say, year? I don't know. Speaking of Clojrewerkz, I don't think there are going to be any super exciting developments. It's just going to be more of the same. Boring projects, solving boring problems many people have. Hopefully being stable, well tested, well documented, with a sane backwards compatibility story. And yeah, so we're just going to do more of the same. That's why people use us. We don't have any amazing projects up our sleeve, even though we have some unreleased projects. You can expect a lot of boring, stable, documented stuff from us.
Okay.
That's all I care for.
As you know, this is audio only, but on the video version, I'll put some links to your sites as well, to your Clojrewerkz stuff. Okay. So I think that's all. Anything else? And before we close up,
well, one small thing, which is, if you haven't yet switched to Clojure 1.7 Alpha 4, or is it Alpha 5, which is the most recent?
I'm not sure.
Give it a try.
Okay.
Because it has substantially better compilation time, at least on my code bases, and it is just as stable as 1.6.0.
Okay, I'll try that.
If you have to like reload most of your code base often, or start a REPL and stuff, or run tests from the command line, it's probably going to be a substantial improvement to your workflow. Still, far from Go start and compilation times, but much better than what we used to have.
So is general performance a lot better in Clojure 1.7 then?
No, it's just compilation time.
Compilation.
It's the compiler that doesn't create as much garbage. I don't think the runtime performance really has changed in that version.
Okay. Yeah, it's still fast enough anyway. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll put a link to that as well in the video version, in the video one. And okay, so I think that's all. So thanks a lot for your time, Michael. And
Thank you for having me.
yeah, thank you.